Hey, this is Ben Ufana, and this evening here with Abhishek, and you're from,
The southern India.
yeah, what state again?
Karnataka.
Karnataka, yeah. And so you showed up in class about a year ago,
Yes.
and what was going on with you at that time?
So I was about to complete my master's degree. It was my second year, and I had this very acute nagging sense that I wasn't fully myself,
Mm-hmm.
and that no amount of thinking about it or trying to figure what was wrong really that didn't really help me cause a breakthrough and change my life completely. So I knew that there has to be a holistic treatment to this sort of issue I had, and little did I realize that there could be healers in America, at least from where I came from. In India, there's a lot of such mystic traditions, and there's a lot of energy work that is involved. So I was going through the Meetup app, and then I was looking at anything that said energy, anything that said read anything remotely holistic. And when I saw this, I just thought, let me see what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And since then on, it's been quite a journey, and I'm still on it, and I'm grateful for it.
Okay. Now, I remember like you first came to class, and I'm hugely empathic whenever people come to my classes or I'm working with people individually. If I could just be out on the street or any public space or someone's home, wherever, and I just looking at people, I see and I feel within their body. And even more so, like when I have people stand in front of me, I hold my hand in front of the body and I just start scanning. And so I pick up like the kinds of issues a person's dealing with, where you're at emotionally, how you're struggling. I could feel like the resources you have available. And when there are certain deficits, like if you're lacking certain faculties or resources that you need in order to be able to function. It's just very palpable to me. So when you came to class that night, I could just feel right off, and it was just immediately apparent that there was this like huge disconnect, like you were kind of floaty at that time, And so I'm just thinking like how crucial it is, to pull you into your body. And first you came to class, and a few times, and then I looked into your aura that night, like the scanning, like I was talking about. And so, as I was doing that scanning, and initially I spoke with you about the individual work, and at first you didn't respond. You came to class those few times, and then I didn't see you for quite a while.
Quite a while.
Yeah, a long time. And months and months went by. I had gone back to Sri Lanka a few times, and I've been out to Idaho. I lost someone very near and dear to me out there, and then I came back, and then you reappear, and this time, again I'm looking into your aura, and not only the dissociation, the disconnect from your body, but I was also pointing out you had some digestive issues, like kind of bloating, distension. Your digestion wasn't what it really needs to be. And so I was pointing that out, and then this time I was able to get through. Like, the frustrating thing for me sometimes about doing classes is having this acute sensitivity was, having my senses open, being able to look and see into the body, to feel what's going on with people. and just seeing the extent to which people are, could be dissociation, disconnected from their bodies, how they're wounded. A lot of people struggling within their relationships, or maybe having gone through a breakup or divorce or something, they're just holding enormous amounts of pain which they're not able to process or digest, their own emotional responses to what's going on in their lives. And so I see that, and I think one of the biggest challenges is that most people have absolutely no sense of what is possible in terms of healing and growth. Like they're not in any way familiar with kinds of healing practices that Native Americans and other indigenous peoples have worked with for many centuries. And one of the things that makes it worse too is that there's a lot of people these days that they go through a few weekend workshops, and before you know it, they're calling themselves whatever, blah blah, master healer or something. And it's just absolute bullshit. Because you cannot become a healer, within, I'm probably offending some people here, but you cannot become a healer within a few weekends. I often ask people, if you require the services of a dentist, or you have some medical emergency and you need the services of a Western allopathic medical practitioner, how are you going to feel if that person has, you discover that person has just a few weekends of training, so how is it that people can operate with some kind of assumption that you could become a healer within just a few weekends? It's, to become a healer, it requires, there's this whole process of apprenticeship one goes through. Usually one would train with one of the older traditional doctors, say like among the Native Americans, towards the end of that individual's life, towards the end of that doctor's life, and he or she would transmit a portion of their own healing gifts to you, and then you would go through an intensive process like the vision quests that involve going out to fast alone in the mountains for, say, a period of like 4 days and nights without food and water. And the Native Americans, at least the tribes that I lived among, once you received that transmission, they said you had to go through the vision quest in order to earn the right to work with these kinds of healing gifts, for that this kind of healing gift of these powers to be able to work for you and such. But here in our fast-paced modern day world, we're so far removed from these ancient spiritual traditions. Your country, India, you have quite a bit more of it, but there's a big difference too. Like you lived for a period of time in a residential school which was run by Ramakrishna order?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe you could tell them a little about that.
So I lived in a residential school for about 5 years. That is between ages 13 and 18, 19. So that was really a formative experience for me. I'd begun to just have an identity of myself and then figure out who I was. It was sort of like my adolescence. But the residential setup was quite different. It was a holistic atmosphere, a lot of surrounded by a lot of spiritual teachings, and sort of like very how do you say?
But it was kind of removed from the world in a sense.
I would say that, yeah. Sort of like a different world in itself, segregated from what was actually going on. And there's sort of a lot of emphasis on going inwards and things like that. But I figure that much later, when I look at the problems that I'm going through, I mean, this is only personal experience. It's that at that young age, there's a lot of room to take in such profound teachings, and it's very possible that those teachings become hypocritical in some way. Maybe when those teachings are being taught, the intentions are very pure, but if the receiver and the student is still immature to understand that completely, the student can always distort it to the level of to his own emotional level, and that's what I did. I internalized all of that, but when I came out into the world, I just couldn't relate to what was going on.
You couldn't connect with the outer day-to-day world.
I could not at all. And so I was kind of stuck in this time frame when I was in the residential school, and I was stuck at that time point for many, many years. So part of the main healing work that is happening to me through Ben is working out that dissociation and bringing out the true version of who I am, and just killing off the image that I'm trying to keep up.
Yeah. So what was that like? Well, first with the dissociation, like at you're just entering your teens, and so you're in this sort of monastic environment, basically, and with all these people who are somewhat removed from the world. And so there's not that emphasis on really jumping into life, really being engaged, all the kinds of normal explorations that we do as adolescents. And instead you're around all these people who are, again, as I was saying, more removed, more like kind of renunciates in a way. And there are many things, like for years I've worked with people who were very much dissociated, they're just not that present in their bodies. I was too, initially. In my case, I suffered as a result of a great deal of physical and emotional abuse or trauma during my childhood and adolescence. And so experiencing a lot of this, having gone through so much abuse and just internalizing all that pain and suffering, I was in survival mode. I just had to shut down, and just constantly under threat in a way, and not able to fight back or really defend myself in that environment. And in many ways I went numb. And so as I get into adulthood, it's much of the foundation that I needed to be fully functional, it just wasn't there. It had not properly developed. Like if you're I grew a garden for a number of years, and I really enjoyed the process, because planting these little tomato and pepper plants and whatever else, and caring for them, being very protective, watching over them, putting them in good soil and making sure they got the water and the sunlight, and my garden really thrived. And as children, when we're growing up, we need to be in an environment that really nourishes and nurtures us. And there's different kind of nourishment and experience that encourages our growth and development. And so if we're subjected to a lot of abuse, or even say if we have parents that are just very shut down emotionally, they're not present, they're not there to mirror, to reflect back, to validate us and our experiences, it has the effect of creating kind of a disconnect. If there's a lot of physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, if they're just they abandon us, if they're, just drop out of our life, disappear, and all these things. There are other experiences too that cause people to disconnect from their bodies or dissociate. And say, like, I've worked with many people after having gone through surgery. Surgery may be necessary, or not maybe, is necessary in some instances, or is the best known option within our current, at this time in history. The reason I say that is because among Native Americans and people of other indigenous cultures, one example is you'd have individuals who were wounded in battle. And some of these really powerful doctors had the ability, they could actually extract the projectile, the bullet or arrow. They had that power where they could actually seal the wound. But to find somebody, in this present day society that possesses that power, that could, is capable of facilitating that level of healing, it's not something that's very readily available. It'd be very difficult to, maybe if you're in some parts of Central South America, and I saw my mentor, for instance, be able to close open wounds. But it's very rare to find people working on this level anymore. But in any case, I know I'm diverting a bit, but going through, undergoing surgery and the physical trauma that results from that, if you're injured in an automobile accident, a lot of individuals that have like soldiers returning from Iraq and Afghanistan and other wars that have gone through various traumatic experiences, and it just overwhelms their processing capacity, their ability to cope. And so what happens is that it creates this, in the process, creates this disconnect from their emotions, from their physical bodies. And so you have all these individuals for various reasons that become very disconnected physically, emotionally, and it can be hugely difficult for them to function. Not being as present in your body. I know from my own experience, like trying to get out into the world, I knew from an early age I wanted to train with a traditional native doctor. And I was fortunate at 17, I took off and I got to stay in Oklahoma and go into ceremonies and apprentice with my mentor. But when I got out into the world on my own and started to work with people, I just lacked a lot of the resources that I needed. And for me, it took, there's a lot of practice, meditative practices I developed of going into feelings and bodily sensations, and it's been a big part doing deep tissue body work, the work I did with very gifted and powerful healers, and going through the vision quest, practice of going alone into the mountains for the 4 days and nights without food and water. All these things have progressively brought me more and more into my physical body and enabled me to develop more of the resources I needed to be able to function, and it's progressively functioning at higher and higher levels. But Abhishek, what was your experience like? Describe more in vivid detail, like what it's like to how you were functioning before with, say, that limited resources.
So before there was I always thought that words like depression and trauma were really extreme cases which only few had. But really my life was nowhere near as normal as I would think. Part of the reason was that first of all, I was struggling with trying to figure out what I really wanted to do, and if I was doing what I loved doing, and if I made the wrong choice. And all this was happening while I was pursuing my master's, and master's is supposedly a time where you already know why you're doing what you're doing. And so that was a major sort of distraction for me. I couldn't focus on my studies, and apart from that, it was really hard to explain. This I couldn't engage with my peers. There was some kind of subconscious feelings that wouldn't really allow me to let go of all the conditioning that I've allowed myself to have from all the younger years of so much reading and compulsive reading, I would say. It was really hard to even describe my situation, just like I'm having the difficulty now. And so I was too much in my head, extremely sedentary lifestyle. I never used to work out. I always wanted to, because we all know that it is healthy to do so. But no matter what I did, I wasn't able to sustain that habit. I used to think that this was a common problem for anyone to sustain the habit of going to gym. It's a very common thing. But I don't know, I lacked motivation, I lacked intensity, I lacked thrill. I wasn't able to allow myself such simple pleasures at all. And so I was at a loss. I really didn't know what to do. The only thing I tried to do to solve my problem was to find books that could relate to my situation. But obviously I wasn't able to explain this to anybody. So I was really at a loss. But when I first met Ben, and when he looked into my aura, he literally said this to my face, that I was quote unquote, severely dissociated. And strangely enough, that felt good. To be honest, it really felt good because I've always wanted for someone to see what's going on within, as it is. I mean, I have learned healing myself, and my mother as well. She's a healer. I've been healed by her, and I'm familiar with the chakras and the energy systems. But for someone to be able to say that there's something seriously wrong, it was sort of very reassuring, because all the trouble I was going through, it was for something. And I knew that, okay, I found the right person. And since then, there's been incremental changes every time I met Ben, whether it was just for a class wherein we sit and meditate and just go into our bodies and locate certain feelings that are residing in our bodies, or it could be individual work with Ben.
The one-on-one sessions.
The one-on-one sessions, which is far more profound, so profound that the first 2-3 days after the individual session, the one-on-one session, you don't know what's going on. You're not the same person. It's extremely profound, and that is what keeps me coming back to more and more sessions like those. And it never feels that okay, the work has been done and I'm healed, and from now on, life is going to be different. I've never felt that there is a point where you reach beyond which everything is okay. It's at every stage you are at a different point of view, and from that point of view, there's always something that you don't know. You realize you don't know. You realize you're lacking in certain things, and you want to just keep developing and keep taking the assistance of someone who knows it better, like Ben. And
so before too, you also had, like I pointed out, some of the digestive issues. What was going on in that respect?
So I always felt that since a young age, I had a bloating in my stomach, and I used to like I had a belly. Like, to put it in plain words, I've always had a belly. But I was very careful. I was very conscious. I was very conscious of my body image, and so I had kind of learned to tuck it in, and it would always be tucked inside, and nobody would really notice. But deep inside, I knew that it was there. I had to fix it, but then I couldn't muster the motivation on my own to go to the gym to do it. But I was eating right, but then all the fat had already accumulated, and something drastic had to change in order to get rid of that. So I always felt that there was a lot of undigested matter that was in my tract, and so I always felt that even when it came to bowel movement, I always felt that there was still residue inside my body, and then it wasn't being processed as efficiently as it could. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize that that such a physical internal process had to so directly do something with our emotional makeup inside as well, which I've learned from Ben, and that is very true. Most in our healing classes where we sit and meditate, I'm constantly told to actually focus on the abdomen, especially the intestines, and see how they feel. Like the texture. There's some sort of a feeling that comes up as you kind of focus on that area of your body. Sometimes you feel that part of your body is kind of sluggish, or it's very active. So for me, most of the time, the intestines used to feel really very small and shrinking, and then sort of very weak in digestion. And that used to translate into something, an emotional equivalent. And every time we go into these sitting meditations, we tap into what that emotional equivalent, and then sort of like breathe into it, meaning you allow that, whatever that, usually the emotional equivalent is very unpleasant. It could be a fear. It's usually some sort of fear. It could be anxiety, it could be anything, and that's usually unpleasant. And Ben suggests that you go deeper into that feeling, meaning which you feel it completely. You're not trying to push it away. You're not trying to change that feeling. If it's fear, you allow that fear to scare you. So you're really feeling that fear. But the interesting thing is, it lasts for about a few minutes, and if you persist to stay with it, it just diffuses, and it's suddenly everything changes. It's like calm waters all over. And then that's the little transformation that happens in the sitting meditations, which is just 10% of what happens in the one-on-one sessions.
Yeah, the classes are like a dusting compared to what happens in the one-on-one. And people's experience of the emotions will vary. Say, like if you're going through a breakup or experiencing the death of a loved one, then those emotions could have a much greater intensity, and they can really persist for some time. So sometimes even real powerful emotions, like fears that you've carried for decades, you can move through those quickly, but it's going to depend on the individual and the amount of emotional charge behind those specific emotions. But I've learned just from my own experience in working with so many people that whatever feelings arise in response to the issues or challenges or day-to-day life experiences, to be fully present with these feelings as they arise. But we can't expect like them to just be done in a few minutes, because it's so important for us to come from a place of acceptance for our own internal process. And so in some instances, if these feelings are persistent, if they continue to come up, that we're able to stay present as long as we need to, and even if that means coming back on a daily basis, even if that continues for weeks or months on end. Sometimes we're dealing with situations that are, like I know people find themselves in really difficult circumstances where they're just struggling with very difficult realities in their lives. And when that's the case, then sometimes we experience a lot of the same emotions returning, and it's that persistence. For me, example is in 2008 when the banksters crashed the economy and the bottom fell out from under me. And that fear, that terror of just not knowing how I was going to survive at that time. And those feelings, came up persistently for months on end. That was not a fun time. And so how's your digestion now?
It's much better. It's so much better. It was only after my digestion got better that I realized how heavy I felt around my abdomen and how that would seriously limit my physical movement. Actually, with a better digestion, my inclination to move, to get out of the house and to go to the gym and to have good food, anything that has to do with taking care of the body, that has improved a lot. Mm-hmm. Also in the way that I think, there's this sort of swiftness and this sort of sharpness in the way that I think. I used to feel very foggy in my mind and indecisive, but with improved digestion and various other things, there's a lot more clarity now. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say it's all done and taken care of.
Of course not.
Yeah.
It's a process. It's ongoing. There's a continued building. Even for me, is much work as I've done, having gone through the Vision Quest dozens of times, the 4 days and nights alone in the mountains without food and water. Even after all these years, there's a continued building and development, just continually moving. As they talk about in India, this process of self-realization, one is never done. You just keep progressing further. And that's a huge deficit in the thinking of so many people in this in our modern day tech-infused world. Is they want to get to a place where they're comfortable and it's like, okay, everything's cool, I'm fine now, see you later. But we cannot sit very long without becoming stagnant. You can only sit for actually a short time, and either you're kind of sliding backwards, or you're developing yourself, you're progressing forward, but you cannot just get comfortable, which is, unfortunately, that's sort of a mentality of that so many people are operating with. And that's why I've been so persistent myself, doing a lot of intensive practice on a daily basis, and the ongoing, continuing with the Vision Quest, as I was saying. So we've had a number of conversations, and again, just the difference, because before, I remember just how ethereal you felt. I mean, it was so pronounced, and just all these like spiritual concepts where you were up here somewhere, and it was like. But in these conversations we've been having, over the past couple of months, you're so much more engaged. How would you share some of what you've been telling me about, like the difference, like how you're, in terms of now you've graduated college, you know, you've completed your master's, and there's much greater degree to which you're going after it. You talked about some things where, you know, before there's the brain fog and the overwhelm with certain challenges, and you've been telling me a lot about how much more engaged you are.
Sure, yeah. A major change has been after I graduated and started working. The very fact that I was working suddenly gave me like a cause to give myself to. So for me, it was the first time that I ever got into professional work. Up until now, I've always been studying or reading up on something, but never really performing in that sense. There was a lot of theory involved of learning something, and then it felt like a lot of preparation, but never really performing. So when I finally got into work, at about the same time I started getting into the healings with Ben, that really gave me an outlet to kind of express myself and my creativity in my work. So that's really been like an outlet for me to really bring myself to like what is happening around me, because before there's a lot of concepts in my head, a lot of spiritual concepts, intellectual ideas, but they never really used to transform themselves into action, and a lot of it was really wrong and very one-sided, and half knowledge is very dangerous. So I was stricken with that sort of disease, and there's very poor translation into real life. So but after the healings, the difference really has been to sort of apply everything that I've learned into real life circumstances. It's almost becoming natural for me now to do that. It's not as if I think, okay, it's a natural process. There's no thought that says I have to do this, but I'm already doing it. So I'm really engaged with whatever is going on and exerting myself into the world. I mean, for somebody who's living somewhat a normal life, this might sound very weird, like what am I talking about? But for me, it's every little step. I actually feel like I'm an adolescent now. Moving out into the world and then making sense of what's out there, what's going on, and who I am and what I want to do. So really the who I am, the question, and what I want was something that I was never able to answer. Up until now, there wasn't really a sense of identity as to why I'm here or what I really like doing, and anything. There was no identity at all. So really it's like I'm being reborn again, and yeah, I'm just taking baby steps now, and sometimes it's overwhelming because everything is new and it's scary at the same time. But with the healings, there also comes this urge to just keep moving, and that kind of propels you forward despite any fears, hesitations, and apprehensions.
Yeah, I know. As I was getting started, my own disconnect that, as a result of, the dissociation from the abuses I suffered. And so there's a lot of, in order to do any kind of healing work, there's also there's a business side of it, and I'd have to interact with people. And I found that very intimidating. For instance, speaking in front of groups of people, there were times I would completely freeze up. My mind would just go blank. and I could not think of a thing to say. It was very embarrassing, humiliating, to say the least. And I noticed that, like, I have a very acute sense of what my limitations are over time. I've had this, and as I've been doing this work, as I've been growing, healing, developing myself, I'm very cognizant of where I've come from, like the hole that I dug myself out of, and then I could feel my current set of limitations, and then what would happen is I'd go on that next vision quest, and I'd come back down, I'd get out into the world again, be interacting with people, and I would test my limits. And so, for instance, again, speaking in front of groups of people, and I'm just noticing, wow, I'm more comfortable, I'm not so inhibited, it's just easier, I'm flowing better, I'm more authoritative when I need to be, more direct and assertive, and just saying what needs to be said instead of holding back, and so in so many ways just more direct. And so that's, I've been noticing, like, every time I see Abhishek, I'm looking into his aura. He shows up for class, or he comes back for another session, I'm looking into his aura. And so what happens with each session, there's like this incremental change. And before looking into your aura is like, especially the lower chakras, in the abdomen, the base of the sternum is like hugely underdeveloped. Just like, and the abdomen, we were talking about the bloating, distension, and I could feel that it was very palpable. Honestly, we need to clean that up. That's not a good thing, especially just being in your mid-20s. You shouldn't have this bloating or distension. But that's, from my standpoint, that's something that's very easy to work with. I work with many people, with like all kinds of digestive disorders like colitis and Crohn's disease, IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome, and people just, having abdominal pain, even passing blood in their stools or something. And in the course of working with these individuals, this presence working through me draws them into their body, and people become that much more present within their body. They're digesting a lot of this very stressful, painful emotion that's held in the body. And in developing the infrastructure, how do I explain that? There's, computers are like these operating systems. They're highly complex, but we as individuals are even more so. And modern day medical science we've gained much greater understanding of our physiology, the physiological aspects of our makeup, but there's also, in addition to that, there's the subtle bodies consisting of the aura and layers of the aura and the chakras and all that. And it goes both ways, because if there's an injury to the physical body, or some kind of disease process begins to occur, if there's, if we experience some kind of toxins, then that can have a very adverse effect on specific organs or parts of the body, whatever. And then that will have a very negative impact on the subtle bodies consisting of the chakras and layers of the aura. But it can go the other way too, such as, like, if we're under tremendous stress and there's a lot of upset, if we're going through chronically stressful events, we're overwhelmed emotionally, if we're subjected to various traumatic experiences, and we're not processing those emotions. We're overwhelmed by them. We're internalizing that emotion. And so a lot of that emotion gets trapped within the abdomen, for instance, that among other places. And so when all of that emotion's trapped within the body and we're not processing it, that can impede the functioning of the intestines, for instance, and other visceral organs. And then, in addition, when I'm looking into the subtle bodies consisting of the chakras and layers of the aura, I will often see there will be damage. It will be impeding the function, and with that interference in the functioning of the subtle bodies, then over time they start to break down. The chakras and layers of the aura start to degenerate, and then that translates in, it begins to express itself in the physical body, So it goes both ways there. And so as Abhishek and I have been working, as I said, I was very cognizant right from the start, like, here's this bloating distension, and I pointed it out immediately. And so as we've been working, and that's been cleaning up, and your digestion's improving, and you're more fully present within your body. As you're more present within your body, you have more resources, and you're more focused, and like here you are in this highly complex field of data analytics, and you're starting out here, and they have you working on various projects, and it is very demanding work. There's a lot of complex problem-solving challenges, and already, even though you've been there a couple months, they're already depending on you to perform various tasks. And it's a startup company, and they're struggling and all, which that's often the case, but they're wanting to keep you around.
Yeah.
Because they're seeing the value in your performance.
Yeah.
Whereas, before you were more out there, more ethereal, now you're getting more grounded, and you're developing. And that's a big part of this work, in working with yourself, and I see it with many people I work with. There's a development of greater capability, greater competence. You're like progressively expanding your range of motion. And this is, the early stages of healing. Especially I get a lot of people that deeply wounded, just have suffered tremendous wounding. Sometimes childhood trauma, just all kinds of losses, physical illnesses, being somewhat physically debilitated even. And my approach is going to vary a lot, because each individual's needs vary significantly. But there's the aspect of the healing in terms of actually healing the physical body, getting the physical body. So somebody's experiencing respiratory or digestive disorders, they've been injured in an automobile accident, you have to mend the body. It's like you're in pain, you're not functioning, your body, your internal organs are not functioning properly, you don't feel good, and mentally, emotionally, you're not functioning very well either. You're not going to be very productive. So, first order of business is often, getting the physical body on track. And then there's addressing the emotional wounding. And we have to, if we carry these traumatic wounds, that can be very debilitating. We're overwhelmed with grief and anxiety if we're just experiencing just a lot of pain and sadness. Again, you're not going to be at your best. You're not going to function at any kind of optimal level. So, getting the body on track, getting you on track emotionally, is crucial. But then, as physically, mentally, emotionally, that you're stronger, you're more resilient, you're in, getting in better and better shape there. Then a big part of the healing is, what is your purpose? What are you here to do in this life? And so I'm always, as I work with you, as I work with anyone, I'm always looking for that. What are you here to do? What is it that you need to be doing in this world? It's like our feelings connect us with our needs, and our needs connect us with our deeper sense of purpose. So as we do this deep level processing, emotionally, healing of the emotional wounds, then there's this revealing. It's like more and more of your true core authentic self begins to emerge. And as that happens, you get a sense of what's important to you, and there's more passion that emerges. Like, I remember when I first saw you and you were in school, and even when you disappeared for a while and then came back, but you were still like hugely ambiguous about, like, as you said, being in grad school, and you still didn't really know what you wanted to do. But then I think from everything you're telling me, you're deriving a lot more enjoyment out of your work, and you're finding it challenging, rewarding, fulfilling.
Yeah, totally. Even though it was my decision to take up data analytics, in fact, I changed my major to data analytics. My first major was in engineering management, but then it was my choice to shift. And even after I did that, for some reason I couldn't own up to that decision and glean rewards from what I was doing. And I didn't know why, but now I do. There was this serious lack of motivation or proactivity to put myself into a situation to learn new things. There was a complacency. There was I was trying to be extremely comfortable and extremely anxious to move into new situations, to learn new things, to accept that there are many things that I didn't know, and that I would have to start learning things right from the start. And that was really difficult for me to accept, because ever since I was young, I had gotten very used to the feedback, the positive feedback from elders, and it sort of really got to my head. And ever since then, I had always been stuck to feel entitled to certain things, but I wasn't able to face the fact that that I would have to, in whatever I do, it is very possible that I don't know a lot of things, and that I would have to learn from scratch. And that applied to what I was studying as well. So that unwillingness to open up and to accept the imperfections, it was very hard to accept all those. But as I gained more strength from this healing sense of identity, all that unwillingness really diminished, and I was really able to. I was humbled basically by the experience, and the world is not as intriguing as intimidating as it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that I kind of suffered an identity crisis back then.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say I'm completely out of it. Like, yeah, it's a triumph, and I'm very grateful for this whole journey, and I'm sure I will continue for the rest of my life. And because I really believe that this is the starting point for whatever is going to happen in future for me. I may have all the resources, like we all have our resources, but unless we learn how to actualize them into our lives, it doesn't mean anything.
Actually, it's maybe a topic for another discussion, but Native Americans would say that much of the soul doesn't fully come into the body, and training with the master from China now at this point over 16 years in the internal martial arts, which has its roots in Taoism, and even though his English is very poor, this Chinese master, he was saying something comparable. I was really shocked to hear him say that one day, a number of years ago, like after I first began to train with him. And what I find, like looking, like when I first looked in your aura and stuff, I could see that a lot of the foundational resources weren't there. A lot of that infrastructure wasn't there. And so as we've been working, I'm seeing this development, like a lot of the actual now at this point, like within the heart, heart really projects out. There's a lot of presence, front and the back, on both sides. The second is the sixth chakra. Actually have front and rear aspects that go out the front and the back of the body, and the crown goes straight up from the top of the head, the root straight down from the tailbone. And so I'm observing this continued building process, and a lot of the emphasis, like in India and Tibet and China, where they would do all these intensive kinds of yogic, internal practices, were to develop greater and greater faculties. And so with that development, there's developing one's intellectual mind, developing various spiritual senses, like ability to precognitive, to know things before they happen, to be able to, my mentor, this amazing ability to just look into the body, and he could see in great detail, even down to a cellular level, specifically how some of the illness was manifesting. My mentor Horace, I don't know what grade he went to. This old Native American doctor, and I don't think he even finished junior high school or anything, and yet, people suffering from cancer and heart disease, all kinds of things, and the modern day Western medicine, they weren't getting the help they needed, and people would go to him, and he's just very calmly, just looking down into the body and just describing in great specific detail, like what exactly was happening, how the body was malfunctioning. He said, here's what's happening, and here's what we're going to do, and we're going to address that. And there are a lot of people who survived cancer and leukemia and other serious diseases, illnesses that wouldn't have otherwise. So it was a pretty amazing experience getting to train with Horace. He was one of the last surviving really powerful doctors among the Kiowa tribe. Again, I'm kind of going on a roundabout, but every time we work, I'm looking back in your aura and I'm just seeing like this greater infrastructure. Like I said, the computers, have all this circuitry, the hardware, and that facilitates, the old, when we first got laptops, we had these 386s, 486s, and you couldn't do much with them. Maybe just run like simple accounting or word processing software. That's about it. And over time, they become progressively more sophisticated. And so, in correspondence with what you're describing, this like higher progressively higher levels of functioning, I'm looking into your aura and I'm seeing like more presence, I'm seeing more development in the subtle bodies. And what happens in the subtle bodies, the chakras, layers of the aura, that corresponds to what's going on within the brain, the nervous system, all the internal organs of the body. It's all interconnected. They all impact each other. So, and that's, again, a lot of the emphasis on within these ancient spiritual traditions, China, Tibet, India, among Native Americans and other traditions. There's so much emphasis on doing intensive spiritual practice, as well as making use of specific interventions. You know, Native Americans, other indigenous peoples would work with gifted healers such as myself. There are traditional doctors. Native Americans going through intensive practices like the Vision Quest, Sundance. But there's this progressive building, healing the woundedness, whether it's emotional, physical, whatever level, and building greater and greater resources, faculties, so that we can, again, a term from, that a lot of the yogis or gurus in India refer to self-realization, so that we move into greater and greater degrees of self-realization. We've gone on for a long time here, and I try to keep videos short, but there's a lot to say here, so I think we better sign off here, and we can always come back and talk about other things later. So, bye-bye for now.